There are moments in sports that stop being about sports. What happened at Chase Field on Wednesday night crossed that line before the seventh inning was over. Before the suspensions were announced. Before the audio recording surfaced and rewrote every assumption that anyone had made about what had actually occurred on that field. Before the opposing manager sat in front of a microphone and said words that no manager in recent baseball memory has said publicly about a player on another team. Before all of that, in the raw, immediate, still unprocessed moment when the replays were circulating and the stadium was still buzzing with the specific electricity of something witnessed that cannot be unwitnessed, the reaction was not analytical. It was visceral. 56,000 people in that building. Millions more watching on screens across the country, across Japan, across every corner of the world where Shohei Ohtani has accumulated the kind of following that transcends the sport he plays. All of them watching the same footage. All of them arriving at the same conclusion before anyone in a position of authority had said a single official word. What the Diamondbacks second baseman and catcher did to Shohei Ohtani on Wednesday night was not baseball. It was something else. Something that the rulebook has language for but that the language of the rulebook cannot fully contain. Something that required a response, from the league, from the Players Association, from the Diamondbacks organization, from the manager who had either sanctioned what happened or failed to prevent it, and whose culpability in either case amounted to the same thing. A response came. Faster than anyone expected. More severe than most predicted. And the audio recording that arrived before the official announcements made the severity feel, if anything, insufficient. The game itself had been tense from the first inning. Arizona had come into the series with something to prove, a team that has spent the better part of 2 months watching the Dodgers pull away in the division standings, accumulating the particular frustration of a competitive roster that cannot close the gap between itself and the team ahead of it regardless of how well it plays. That frustration had been visible in the first 2 games of the series. In the way their pitchers worked Ohtani differently than the scouting report suggested they would. In the way their position players carried themselves in the dugout between innings, the heightened alertness of people preparing for something rather than simply playing a game. In retrospect, the preparation was for exactly what happened. Ohtani had reached base 3 times through the first 6 innings. A walk, a single to left center, and a double off the wall in right that had driven in 2 runs and pushed the Dodgers' lead to 3. He had been, by the accounting of the evening to that point, exactly what he always is, the most consequential presence on the field, the player around whom the entire competitive logic of the game organized itself, the reason the Diamondbacks were losing and knew they were losing and could not find a mechanism to change. What happened in the 7th began as a baseball play. Ohtani reached first on a single, his 4th hit of the evening. He took his lead. The pitcher delivered. And as Ohtani read the pitch and began the mental calculation that base runners make dozens of times a game, stay, go, watch, the Diamondback second baseman moved. Not to field a ball. Not in response to any defensive requirement of the moment. Toward Ohtani. What followed happened in approximately 4 seconds. 4 seconds that the camera angles captured from 6 different positions, that the replay system slowed to a frame-by-frame accounting, that lip readers and audio analysts and former players and current officials would spend the next 18 hours examining from every available perspective. The second baseman made contact. Not incidental contact, the unavoidable physical proximity that baseball's footwork sometimes produces. Deliberate contact. The kind that announces its own intention in the way it is made, in the location it targets, in the fact that it occurs when no baseball play requires anyone to be where he positioned himself. Simultaneously, and this simultaneity would become significant in the investigation that followed, the catcher, in the aftermath of a pitch that had gone to the backstop, arrived at Ohtani from a different angle. Also making contact. Also in a location and manner that no baseball play had required. 2 players. 1 target. 4 seconds. The stadium understood immediately. The audio recording surfaced at 11:47 p.m. Nobody has claimed responsibility for releasing it. Nobody has explained precisely how a recording made in what should have been a private space, the Diamondbacks dugout, during the middle innings of the game, found its way onto a platform where it was heard by 3 million people within 2 hours of its posting. What matters is what it contained. The recording was 43 seconds long. The audio quality was imperfect, the ambient noise of a baseball stadium in the middle innings, the overlapping voices of a dugout, the particular acoustic complexity of a space not designed for recording. But the voices at its center were clear enough. Clear enough for the league's investigators to verify their authenticity. Clear enough for the Players Association to decline to contest the verification. Clear enough for the Diamondbacks' own legal team, presented with the recording in the investigation that followed, to offer no substantive challenge to its contents. What those voices said, what was planned, in what language, with what specific references to Ohtani and what was about to happen to him, cannot be reproduced here in full. The league's official summary of the recording's contents, released alongside the suspension announcements, used the phrase premeditated coordinated action and let the legal weight of those 3 words carry the meaning that more descriptive language would have made more vivid but no more damning. Premeditated. Coordinated. Action. 3 words that transformed a dangerous foul into something the rulebook has a different category for entirely. The suspensions arrived at 9:15 the following morning. 50 games each. The second baseman. The catcher. And a third player, a utility infielder whose voice had been identified in the recording, whose direct involvement in the physical events of the 7th inning was less visible but whose participation in what preceded them was documented in the audio with a clarity that left the investigators no discretion. 50 games. In a 162-game season, 50 games is not a suspension. It is a verdict. It removes a player from approximately 1/3 of the competitive calendar. It costs money, significant money, the kind that accumulates to a number that makes the fine attached to the suspension feel almost secondary by comparison. It announces, in the clearest possible institutional language, that what occurred was not a borderline case requiring careful adjudication but a clear violation requiring unambiguous consequence. The fines were announced separately. The total figure, applied across the 3 players and adjusted for salary levels, reached a number that had not been levied in a disciplinary action of this specific type in over a decade. The league released a statement. It was longer than most league statements. It contained specific language about the protection of players, about the investigation process, about the audio evidence and its implications, about the standards of conduct that the sport expects from every person who participates in it at the professional level. It contained one sentence that traveled further than all the others. The behavior documented in this investigation represents a premeditated effort to physically harm a specific player, and the consequences reflect the league's absolute commitment to ensuring that no player, regardless of their prominence or the competitive pressures of the situation, is subjected to deliberate harm. No player, regardless of their prominence. The prominence that sentence was referring to, without naming it, was understood by everyone who read it. The Diamondbacks manager requested the press conference himself. He did not wait to be summoned. He did not issue a written statement through the organization's communications office and declined to appear in person. He walked into the interview room, alone, without a PR representative positioned at his elbow, and sat down in front of the microphones with the look of a man who had not slept and was not trying to appear as though he had. He spoke for 2 minutes before taking questions. What he said in those 2 minutes departed so significantly from the standard language of organizational crisis management that several reporters in the room stopped writing and simply listened. He did not deploy the word unfortunate. He did not describe the events as a situation or an incident or a matter that the league had appropriately addressed. He did not express confidence in his players or support for the appeals process or any of the dozen formulaic responses that the architecture of professional sports crisis communication makes available for exactly these occasions. He said, "I knew something was wrong in that dugout. I did not act on what I knew. That is on me." He said, "What those players did to Shohei Ohtani is indefensible. I will not attempt to defend it. And then he said the thing that stopped the room. "I cannot face Shohei," he said. His voice was even, controlled in the way of someone who has already moved through the worst of what he felt and arrived at something harder and more durable on the other side. "I don't mean that I am avoiding him. I mean that I don't have the standing to look at him and say anything that would be adequate to what happened. I managed that dugout. The dugout produced what it produced. There is no version of an apology that accounts for that fully. But I am offering it anyway, because it is the only thing I have that belongs entirely to me and not to the lawyers or the league or the organization." He paused. "I am sorry. To Shohei specifically. And to anyone who watched what happened and felt what most people seem to have felt watching it." The room was silent for a moment. Then 17 hands went up simultaneously. Ohtani was asked about the suspensions at his media availability. He had been informed of the penalties before the official announcement, a courtesy extended by the league's office, a recognition that the player most directly affected by the investigation deserved to receive its conclusions before the public did. He had listened. He had asked one question, about the appeals process and its timeline, a practical question that revealed more about how he was processing the situation than any emotional response would have. He had thanked the person who informed him and ended the call. At the media availability, a reporter asked him directly, how did he feel about the 50-game suspensions? Ohtani looked at the reporter. "I think the league took it seriously," he said. "That matters to me. Not because of what happened to me specifically, I am fine, I was not seriously injured, I want people to understand that. But because of what it says to everyone else. Every player who has ever been in a situation where something happened on the field that felt like it went beyond the game. The league's response says something to those players." Another reporter asked about the manager's statement. Had he seen it? Ohtani nodded once. "I saw it." Did it mean anything to him? He considered the question for a moment longer than usual. "It meant something," he said quietly. "That kind of honesty is not easy. I recognized it as genuine. And I think," he paused, "I think genuine is enough. It doesn't undo what happened. But genuine is enough." Across the country, the reaction had been building since the footage first circulated. Politicians had commented. Former commissioners had commented. Players from other sports, from other countries, from generations of baseball that predated the current era, all of them adding their voices to a conversation that had stopped being about one game between two teams in 1 week of a long season. The outrage was real. It was broad. It crossed the demographic and geographic lines that sports controversies typically do not cross. It arrived in languages that Chase Field had never been designed to accommodate and reached audiences that had come to baseball specifically because of the player who had been targeted on that field. It said, collectively and in every available register, this is not acceptable. Not for anyone. But especially not for him. The 3 players began their suspensions the following day. Their lockers remained. Their names remained on the roster. The organizational machinery of a baseball team continued to function around their absence in the specific, adaptive way that organizations absorb the consequences of their members' choices. But the audio was still out there. 43 seconds of premeditation that no suspension could fully address and no apology could fully undo. And Ohtani, who had been fine, who had not been seriously injured, who wanted people to understand that, took the field the following afternoon and did what he always does. He played baseball. Against a diminished lineup, in a stadium that was quieter than it had been 2 days earlier, with the particular focused intensity of a man who has decided that the only answer worth giving to everything that has just happened is the one he gives every time he steps between the lines. He went 3 for 4. He drove in 2 runs. He threw a pitch in the 6th inning that the opposing hitter, a player who had not been involved in any of what preceded this game, who was simply trying to do his job in complicated circumstances, swung through so completely that the catcher had already returned the ball to the mound before the hitter had fully lowered his bat. The crowd, smaller than usual but present, responded to that pitch with something that was less noise and more release. The sound of a nation that had been outraged, and was now, for just a moment, reminded of why it watches in the first place.